Is one card too little? It's a lot to put on one card, but
yeah, I would think so in that particular case. And then it would be whether or not I would look at reworking the question as well. So I would think if somebody is like is dead set on asking a question like, will my new venture be successful? Then by all means, shuffle up the deck. You know, there are cards that are a clear yes and a clear no and a clear maybe, and, you know, answer that yes or no question.
So this week, I am super excited to welcome to the podcast someone whose podcast I was on a couple of weeks ago. His name in English is Pierre LeBlanc, I suppose, or Peter LeBlanc. And in French, it's Pierre LeBlanc or Peter LeBlanc. Peter, as I know him, actually lives not in Quebec, in Canada. But I believe you actually do speak French, don't you, Peter?
It's my first language, actually. So yes, yeah, I speak both English and French.
I did not know that. I didn't know it's your first language. Okay, so let me just tell people a little bit about you. So Peter's work, Peter is into tarot. So we're going to talk about tarot, astrology, where the two meet, and we're also going to do a question for someone who asked me something, and I think it's a really good way to explain how you answered this question, which might apply to your life as well. So Peter's work with tarot began after a random journey into a Toronto occult shop as a teen in the early 1980s. There was nothing random about it. It was all He walked out with a Rider-Waite-Smith deck and Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom under his arm, my two first tarot things too. His tarot journey began solo but quickly evolved into a passion he wanted to share with others. So the current evolution of his passion is his weekly podcast, which is the one that I have just been on, called Tarot with Bonnie and Peter. And actually, he's an ex-teacher as well. So hopefully he'll be teaching us a bit of stuff today. So welcome to the show, Peter. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. It's lovely. It's lovely to be here. Really, really excited to be talking tarot and astrology. So,
yeah, me too. So I've got a couple of questions before we get into the astrology of the week ahead, and we're going to talk a bit about the new moon and maybe do a couple of cards on that. I don't know if you feel like it. But the first question I wanted to ask you, just to explain, how do you see astrology and tarot working together? Because I know you know a lot about astrology as well. I don't know if you call yourself an astrologer, but I know you know a lot about astrology.
I could never call myself an astrologer, but I have studied it before. So, you know, definitely more familiar with tarot, but, you know, certainly can hold my own with astrology as well. It's kind of funny because I always think, you know, when I think about astrology, I think of something that's thousands of years old. And when I think about tarot, I think of something that's hundreds of years old. So using them together, like there are systems that overlap. So what a lot of people might not know, tarot deck, 78 cards, every single card in a tarot deck has some kind of connection to astrology. So the major arcana cards are connected to a planet or they're connected to a sign. All the minor arcana cards are connected in some element of a sign. And there are many ways to use the two together, but the easiest way, especially if you're approaching it from an astrology perspective, is, well, what do I know about astrology and where does the tarot find itself? So can I give an example?
Yes, please do.
So we'll start, you know, first sign of the zodiac, start with Aries, right? So Aries has a card associated to it. It's the Emperor card. I could go into long, you know, I have a teaching background. So if I get too teachery, you got to tell me. But the connection, there's a long history between kind of Aries and the Emperor. So all I would say, if you're looking to use the two together, is whatever it is that you're looking at, whether it's a full moon or a new moon in Aries, or it's an aspect, or it's some element of Aries in your own chart, then take a look at the Emperor card, because the card, the Emperor itself, has some real interesting, you know, archetypes attached to it. And then I would kind of blend the two. In some ways, I think about the idea of the Emperor and Aries sort of intermingling. I've used the language that says something like, you know, how does the Emperor wear the cloak of Aries? Or how would Aries, for example, you know, don the cloak of the Emperor? And then look for some commonalities. When you take a look at the image of the Emperor, you can see that regality. You can see, you know, leadership. You can see power. You can often see passion. If you look at the Rider-Waite deck, you can actually see see Aries right there on the deck. There's little, there's like, ram's heads on his throne. So I always think, some of the best ways to use the tarot with astrology is to blend the two stories together. I know a lot of people, think about the idea, well, I'm going to draw a card of a day and how does it link? And I always think that there's nothing wrong with that practice. But I think sometimes using the tarot intentionally with astrology is sort of a great way to get started. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking we should talk straight away about the new moon in Taurus.
Perfect.
Since we are about to have that this week, and we can find out a bit which card goes with the new moon in Taurus. I'll just read you a tiny bit from my diary. So keywords and ideas for this lunation: tense, sexy, dreaming, and healing. So there's quite a lot of pressure building at the time of this super new moon. It's creating what's called a T-square in disguise with angry Mars and furious Pluto. So this is like the stars spelling out the word tension. The energy's been building for a while. You may recall that the previous full moon was also caught in the middle of a Mars-Pluto argument, and it's something not to be underestimated. Anger could flare all too easily. So if you're walking on eggshells around someone or a situation, take care. After all, Mars is the angry planet and Pluto is the furious one. So let's just think about that.
Right.
What would you suggest? Like if you were saying, okay, all right, well, we've got this quite tense new moon. Yeah. What would you do with tarot? How can we increase our understanding of tarot, of the new moon with tarot?
So but that's a perfect example. And this is where I would go into the intentionality of selecting cards. So you mentioned 4 things, right? You mentioned the new moon. You mentioned it being in Taurus. You then mentioned the aspect to Mars and Pluto. So we actually have 4 cards.
Just before the new moon.
And yes, and the description you had that Mars Pluto had an influence on it. So we have 4 tarot cards that we could then pull and take a look at their archetypes. We have the card of the moon, which is the High Priestess, big, powerful card. We have the card of Taurus, which is the card of the Hierophant, which is a really interesting, I always think it personifies that slow, methodical, earth-based element of Taurus. And then you said 2 other cards that kind of throw a wrench into things, or 2, you talked about Pluto and you talked about Mars. Pluto, from a modern perspective, would be associated with the card Judgment. So the system I use doesn't use the 3 outer planets, but again, that Judgment card has, like, there's a euphoria to that card. There's a, hey, look at me. There's a big, there's an announcement. I want to be known to the world. But then you got the Mars card. That's the Tower. We talked about this card before, right? So the Tower, that Mars energy, and you talked about that fiery energy, the Tower wants to take something that was standing and it wants to knock it down to its foundation. It wants to look for something that isn't quite working and give it a good shakeup. So, I think when we've got 2 things there. We have that High Priestess Hierophant. The Hierophant is kind of the archetypal male version of that priest, and the High Priestess is feminine manifestation personified in a card. So you have some real power there, and you have that pushback that's coming from this tower-like energy that, through its lens of the Judgment, really wants to overtly and publicly kind of knock things down. So it's, I don't know if as people are listening to that, if they can see the connection between the astrology and those 4 cards of the tarot, but that's where I would start. I would be looking at those 4 cards and seeing, how does the story of these 4 cards, or the combination of High Priestess Hierophant, Judgment, Tower, how does it enhance my understanding of this upcoming lunation in Taurus? I don't know. Look, I always think the combination of the 2, that's fabulous. There's poetry in that. There's magic in that to me.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, one thing I know with the new moon in Taurus is people often will think about their situation regarding their abundance factor. So maybe we look at the Mars-Pluto clash just before the new moon with the Tower and what was for Pluto?
Judgment.
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 So, okay. So maybe it's about just being really brutally honest with yourself about what you've been doing with your money and tearing down whatever's not working for you and then saying, right, this new moon, I am starting over. What would you think about that as a way to use those cards?
Absolutely. And then, you know, when you talk about the idea of intention setting with a new moon, that sits so nicely with the power of the high priestess. If you look at a lot of decks, she's in the middle of ritual. That's often what she is doing. She could be easily working towards setting an intention. But looking at any practical aspect of your life, but for sure your abundance and money, that Tower card is saying, you know what? Yeah, take a look and see what's not working, because the Tower as well, the lightning bolt of the Tower is going to, if it's not working and you're not noticing it and not prepared to tear it down, sometimes circumstances are going to tear it down for you anyways.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to tarot and astrology, and say with the new moon, do you think that tarot shows you some things that astrology doesn't?
Look, so I guess the answer to that would be, I think it does. And partly because I think the systems don't completely and perfectly overlap. So I think sometimes the story, because the tarot is story-based, it's a visual medium. You know, often you would see the connection to the images that are in the cards will sometimes influence how people are reading them. And I think that the tarot tells a different story. Sometimes it's a connected story to astrology, but it does tell a different narrative. So I certainly think its uses can be different. And I do think that the story can be different, sometimes expanding on a story that astrology is telling you, and sometimes maybe taking you down a different path.
Yeah. And can I give you my 2 cents?
Yeah, of course.
I feel it's with astrology, you kind of get the potential. You see the challenges and you get the potential. With the tarot cards, I feel it's much more sort of didactic. It will tell you in no uncertain terms. Whereas with astrology, you know, there's always like, well, this is happening. So if you do this, you can probably circumnavigate this challenge or rise above it or use it as a stepping stone, whatever. But sometimes tarot feels like it just comes along and goes, whack. There's no namby-pambing around this, you know? With some of those more intense cards, yeah. So I'm just wondering, Peter, would you be willing to draw 2 cards? We'll have A and B.
Yes.
And we'll give people, so bearing in mind the new moon in Taurus is happening this week. Let me just tell people when it's happening.
And as you do that, let me get my deck and prepare it. So I'll give it a good
Okay. So the new moon, it's a super new moon in Taurus happening LA, April 27, which I believe is the day that this episode goes live. Let me just triple check that. Yep. So April 27, 12:31 p.m., so in the afternoon. New York, April 27 at 3:31 p.m. afternoon. London, April 27 at 8:30 p.m. And Sydney, April 28, so the day after at 5:31 a.m. So let's just say this is a really intense new moon. We've heard the astrology, which is Mars. It's off the back of a Mars-Pluto conflict. We've got the cards, which include the Tower and Judgment. So we've said, you know, it's a really good time to be really brutally honest with yourself about what has to go if you really want to get yourself on track with one of the main Taurus things, which is abundance. Let's just say we're focusing on that because it's a good thing to focus on, because a lot of people at the moment are worried about money. So we're going to do a card. In a moment, we're going to do a card for business in general. But we're going to do a card, and it's going to be, you know, what do I need to know? How would you phrase the question, Peter? I mean, my inclination would be, what do I need to know about this new moon in order to boost my abundance? Would that be a way you would ask a question? I'm pretty sure everybody has different ways.
Yep. I often think that stem, what do I need to know, is often a great invitation to the universe to kind of say, okay, you know, you're open to what I'm going to tell you, as the universe kind of says, here, this is what you need to know. Sometimes asking a question like, well, what steps do I need to take? Because I think a question, when we ask a question, we want to make sure we maintain our agency, because sometimes people will be like, okay, well, you know, what's going to happen? And I think there are times when that's how we want to use the tarot, and some practitioners will do that. But then it takes our agency away. If we think of it from a fatalistic perspective. Well, it's going to happen anyways. I saw it in the card. So, what do I have to do about it? So what do I need to know is a great question.
Before we talk about what the cards are, let's just talk about what we're doing here, which is that people can choose now and say it out loud or write it down, or if you're watching this on Facebook, put it in the comments, which card do you choose, 1 or 2? Do you want to hold them up just with the back so people get a visual of the back at least?
So there you go.
So which is 1 and which is 2?
So this is card 1, the one that would be, I guess, in my left hand, with my wedding band on. And
card number 2. Okay.
Is on this side.
So bringing to mind your financial situation, because we're focusing on that because it's the new moon in Taurus and everybody wants to know about money, so why not? Bringing to mind your financial situation, what do you need to know? And are you choosing card 1 or 2? So like I said, say it out loud, write it down, put it in the comments, whatever you do, just commit to it. All right, we will assume people have chosen 1 or 2. So now let's hear, what was number 1?
The number 1 card was the 4 of Wands. So, and for those who are watching, I'm actually using a deck called This Might Hurt by Isabella Rotman, which is kind of a Rider-Waite-Smith based deck. So we've got the 4 of Wands. So the first thing I always think about is the number 4. 4 is a number of stability. So if you're thinking about the idea of resource and whatnot, the first thing the 4 is saying is check about the stability of your resources. How are they? Do you have what you need? Is what's going out being able to be met by what's coming in? If it's, investments or a portfolio or a savings or, a paycheck, is it meeting the needs that are there? Is it providing that level of stability? Second thing I would look at is the suit that it's in, is Wands. So it might be that there is a passionate element. And this is the kind of card that, where you've got stability and passion sort of playing against each other. This might be a time where you're like, oh boy, I'm telling you, I could see myself dropping some money on this passion project that I've got, or that wonderful pair of shoes that I saw that they would look so good in my closet. Like that would be the kind of thing that the Wands would push towards. And the 4 would be like, yeah, you sure? Maybe, just maybe it's time to check and see whether or not some of those more practical aspects would need to be covered first. Okay. That's what card 1 said.
That's amazing. I love it. So if you chose card 1, you now have your message. You need to make sure you can afford it, whatever you're thinking of doing, and that you've got your finances set on kind of stable ground. Would that be a reasonable summary?
It would be, because there is something that is passionate. There's a fire there, that Wands fire, that's sort of drawing you away from that level of stability. That's absolutely a great way of summarizing it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So all the people who chose card 2 are going, oh, we need to know ours. So come on then, let's hear it. What did they get?
Card 2, major arcana card, Judgment, which is interesting because we had
right up to the camera.
Of course, by all means.
There we are. Right. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful deck. So the Judgment card, I always see this card, and I had kind of mentioned that before, right? It's a card of, I'll say, eureka and euphoria. So Judgment is often a card that is a larger than life kind of announcement. So it might very well be that, if you're looking at your finances, that either there will be a eureka moment where you're going, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this is, what my resources spelt out. It might be either, and again, it may not be positive or negative, but it would be sort of in that eureka space. So it'd be like, okay. Oh my goodness, stock market dropped by 12%. I wasn't expecting that. Or, that share that I bought has gone up by 22%. I wasn't expecting that either. Or where did this deposit come into my account? I wasn't expecting that. So there are times when that Judgment card talks about that that euphoric moment. It might also be that it requires news of that, you'll be in a position where you're ready to announce something about your own finances or your own resources. I'm ready to share this with, kind of a larger group of people, family, loved one, friends, public in general.
Amazing. And is there, I mean, you know, I'm a bit like you with astrology. I know tarot, but not as well as I know astrology. One thing I'm curious, the Judgment card usually has the sort of the bugle thing in it, doesn't
Correct.
it? Is that why you talk about getting some news?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So,
And
no, go ahead. No, you were going to add.
And I was going to say, is there a feeling of karma? Judgment, karma.
Yeah, and there is. Sorry, go ahead.
Maybe. So I mean, I'm happy if card number 2 can be really good news, because it sounds like it can be good news as much as anything else.
Correct.
But it can also be like, well, you've made the effort or you haven't made the effort. Now here's the judgment of how that's going to pan out for you.
Yep. And if I'll hold it up again, actually, you can sort of see that represented here in that. And I think that's the myth of Moss, the Egyptian balance of scales at the end of one's life, where you have the heart and the feather, and whichever one, because the action is already done at this point, right? This is the Judgment card is kind of the result of the announcement is for something that's already happened. That's why I was saying you're going in to your account and going, oh my goodness, what is this? This is new. And I think I said right at the beginning, it's non-judgmental. It could be something positive and it could be something negative. You think about the farmer who is not going to sit there at harvest time and going, well, where are my plants, if they didn't plant a seed, right? Too late come harvest time to go, oh, I knew I forgot something. So it is sometimes the result of our own actions. And karma is a good word because it's kind of the summary of what we do. So don't be surprised if the announcement is a result of what you have done with your resources, over the last little while. And that can't be surprised. And that's probably where a card like Judgment can sometimes be hard to hear, because I think what you were saying beforehand is there are times that tarot it's just in your face. It's going to kind of tell you the things, whether you want to hear them or not, it's going to tell them to you anyways. And that, can be certainly helpful, but there are times it can be confronting if we're not ready to hear the message that the tarot has to say.
But it does have a positive side, because I chose card number 2. So
what's that?
Make sure.
No, it totally.
I chose card number 2. It does have a positive side. Yes, good. Okay, just checking.
Yeah, no, it totally does. Totally does. I'm curious to know how I'm curious to know at some point in time, how that goes for people, or whether or not they find out, whether it was a more positive or more negative.
It'll be interesting. So, Peter, what I'd like to do now is just move to a question that I had from one of my mainly Moonology members this week.
Hey.
I'm going to call her Tanya. It's not her name. Let's call her Tanya. And Tanya asked, we were chatting, and a few things that, I just said basically, she said she had this feeling about something, and I said, you know what? I've actually got a feeling I should do a reading for you. And I said, okay. We said, oh, okay, that'd be amazing, please. So I said, okay, so what's your question? Give me a question. So she gave me her question, and she gave me her birth details and so on and so forth. But the question was to do with the fact that she is a healer and she wants to start her own business. And I happen to know that Tanya has been wanting to start her own business for some time now. And she hasn't quite taken fully the leap. I think she's taken little steps. Mm-hmm. And her question was a question she actually asked me about 2 years ago. And I said, you can't really ask that. It's all about what you do. Like, it's not that fated. But she forgot that happened, because she asked it to me again. And she said, the question was, will my business be successful? Or in fact, she asked, to be perfectly literal, will I be successful in my new business? And I just thought, since we were chatting, it would be a very good opportunity for anybody who's listening, who's thinking about something that they want to be successful in. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a new job, business in particular, financial investment, but also anything that you've got on your plate where you're thinking, how is this going to go? Mm-hmm. And let's make it a teachable moment for Tanya, but anybody else who wants to put their hand up and say, okay, I want to hear about this. Mm-hmm. Is one card too little? It's a lot to put on one card, but
yeah. I would think so in that particular case. And then it would be whether or not I would look at reworking the question as well. So I would think if somebody is like is dead set on asking a question like, will my new venture be successful? Then by all means, shuffle up the deck. There are cards that are a clear yes and a clear no and a clear maybe, and answer that yes or no question. I know some practitioners who will work that way. It's not my favorite way to work. I would probably look at expanding that question in maybe 3 different ways. Which I can explain now if you like.
Go on, and then we'll just. What about if we choose one, and then Tanya, that will be your answer, and let's hope I choose the right one for you.
Totally. So the very first possibility would be exactly what we did at first. Would be, well, what do I need to know right here, right now, in this time and in this space about starting my own business? So that would be.
Let's go with that because that's perfect.
Sure, perfect. All right. So
all right, Tanya.
Let's do that.
And I'm gonna. Box and
I've shifted
and anybody
decks.
Anybody else, if this card is for you, just say out loud, this card is for me, or write it in the comments, or write it down on a piece of paper. Okay. This card is for you with something that matters to you.
Okay. So, and the card. So I've drawn a card. I've drawn a card. It is not the Tower. Yay! It is not the Tower. So, and this is where I always think we talk about is one card sufficient? And this is a card. You let me know. Should I reveal what the card is at this particular point?
Tell us what it is.
So the card is the 2 of Pentacles. I'm going to hold it up now.
Wow.
I've switched.
I mean, instantly, it could go either way. Surely.
This is what I mean when we get the idea of drawing, only one card, where I think the tarot does such a good job of telling a greater narrative. But the card in and of itself says, and I think you alluded to that at the very beginning, was there are some balls that are in the air at this particular point in time that would make that success uncertain. So I always think, a couple of things about a 2. A 2 is actually the start of a tarot journey. The 2 of Pentacles is the very beginning. You got Ace, and then 2. It's in those starting cards of that long journey through the suit of Pentacles. So this is a card that says, look, it's an appropriate card for starting a new business. It's like, well, I'm at least recognizing that you're at the start of the journey. And then it's saying, probably not that easy. That it's not just a simple, will I be successful? There are some things you need to look at. For example, how are you balancing the practical aspects of your life and the effort that you're putting into starting this business? How about, and this is a Pentacles card, so how are you balancing the material needs of the non-business life and the resources that need to go into your business, and so forth and so on, right? How are you managing with the chaos that's in your life? That the background of this card is actually quite chaotic. There's waves kind of going. So, the card doesn't answer Tanya's question, yes or no. It really does depend on certain things. So you were going to add some stuff though.
Yeah, I'm just pulling the card up on my screen. Yeah, no, to me, I mean, Tanya, I love you. But this is exactly what I've been saying to you. To me, now, again, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I see the 2 of Pentacles, I see something that's just continuing like that.
Of course.
And so, in astrology, in horary astrology, or even in my deck of my Moonology Oracle card deck, there's a card that says nothing is set in stone. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's what this card is saying. It's saying you can't stay because you've got to do the work. But if you don't do the work, then it's not going to work. And if you do the work, then you've got a reasonable chance that it is going to work. And it's a journey.
Correct.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, I would agree. And it is a journey, and it's honoring the fact that you're actually at the start of this journey. The only thing,
and to me, it's like that's sorry to interrupt. That's the infinity symbol, no. Yep. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's not. Yeah. Do you think we could take a card for advice for Tanya?
Of course. I'm going to continue using. So I shifted decks, which if you sit in my space here, I think I have about 45 decks that are probably at arm's reach, plus a bunch of decks that are on the shelf of I will use you at some point behind the curtain. I'm going to leave the Two of Pentacles out, and then we'll
Okay.
just draw a card around advice. So, and the advice might be, well, this is an interesting card, right? So funny enough, we have the Moon card, right? So this is an invitation to look within. This is, you talk about the idea, and this, might actually bring things full circle. If there's advice to Tanya, this card might be, the Moon is a very powerful, I guess, luminary, but the Moon has power. Use that power of the Moon. If you're stuck, well, how do I get started? Use all the things that sit with this card. Use the feminine power that exists inside the Moon. Use the intuition that sits inside the Moon. We talked about this card when you came on the podcast with Bonnie and I. There are elements of fear that sit inside this Moon. So recognize that, maybe fear is what's preventing that forward motion as well. I really want to start this business, but there are elements of this that I'm afraid of. So honor them and recognize them. And then the Moon is saying, and then use the power, maybe it's the manifestation power that exists inside the Moon, to be able to help propel you forward. Or
in the mainly Moonology membership.
Right?
I have to get a plug in there.
I was thinking, this is the second time this card, Yasmin, has shown up, and the 2 times that we've actually been together.
I know.
Right?
It's so funny.
Yeah. So that would be, if this was a card of advice for Tanya, that's where I would look. I would look at all of those archetypal things. I'd ask that question, what does the Moon mean for me? The other thing I'll talk about, since, we're talking about connections to astrology, although the name of the card of the Moon, makes an obvious connection. The astrological connection to this card is Piscean. So this is a card of Pisces. So it might be looking at timing with Pisces. It might be looking at planetary placements of Pisces. This might be a timing question or a way for you to look at your own chart. What role is Pisces playing in there as well? So keeping those kinds of things in mind. And then again, giving your listeners an opportunity to have one more way to connect the astrology, to connect their astrology and to connect tarot. What do you think of that advice? I
think it's great. I think we will sum it up as, Tanya, it's literally the same old, same old. Nothing is set in stone. You have to put the work in, and then eventually all will be revealed. It's not predestined.
Right.
So there we go. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, Peter, if anyone here is listening and thinking, I want a reading with Peter, where do they find you? How do they get a reading? Can they get a reading?
Of course. The easiest way to get a reading is to head right to my website, which is peterwhitetarot.com. Click on the readings and mentoring, because I do both mentoring for people who are looking at one-on-one support through their studies of tarot, and consultations as well. And book. The other thing, if I can, have a listen to our podcast. Bonnie and I are doing Tarot with Bonnie and Peter. I think that gives you a sense as well as to, if you're interested in the style in which I approach tarot, really gives you a good insight into how, I kind of go through that process. So, and I'd love to see people, love working with new clients. So I'd love to see people either listening to the podcast or in the reading space.
I'll put a link to my episode on the podcast. How about that?
That would be fantastic.
In the show notes, as well as links to your website and everything else.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think that wraps it up. It's a week to detox, especially financially. If you know you've been toxic when it comes to money, detox, Mars, Pluto, and all those tarot cards that back that up. Right. And then new moon in Taurus. And so that was amazing, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me in your space. I really enjoyed it.